Stories don't have a theme. Stories are a theme. Stories are the manifestation of the theme.
Welcome to You Are a Storyteller with Bryan McDonald and Jesse Bryan. This program is produced in Seattle, Washington by Belief Agency. On this week's episode, we discuss how to build a story from the inside out.
Whether it's the film or the play or the story, how do you find that beginning point? Like, what's at the middle of this thing, right? And I'm holding right here. I got two books. A lot of people consider these a couple of the best books ever made on filmmaking.
Sure.
Right? One is Kazan on directing, and the other is Making Movies by Sidney Lumet. And I'm going to just read an excerpt from Kazan to try to see what he was after and how he handled the problem of figuring out really what is this play about, right? Because this is during his really early days. And so this is a clip, and he says, his working method remained the same throughout his career. Once he discovered what a play meant for himself, once he found the clue to self-identification with the theme and the characters, or determined their resemblance to people he knew, he decided upon the style of presentation. So he's trying to figure out the order, right? In what order do I go as a director? How to cast and to direct, and what instructions he would give to the set designer and costumer. He studied the stage and film script to find the single encompassing motive that empowers the work, its core sediment. He called this a spine. So when Kazan was trying to figure out, on the waterfront, the amount of things this guy did, before he started working, he first had to figure that out before he could move forward. Right? He called it a spine. Fast forward to Sidney Lumet. Sidney Lumet wasn't using the term spine. He was using a different term to figure out how to solve the same problem, because both of them are just trying to solve problems.
Right.
Here's how Lumet put it. He said, the question, what is this movie about, will be asked over and over again throughout the book. For now, suffice it to say that the theme, the what of the movie, is going to determine the style, the how of the movie. The theme will decide the specifics of every selection made. Think about that. Every selection made in all the following chapters. I work from the inside out, right? He's not guessing, right? This is the foundational thing. What the movie is about will determine how it will be cast, how it will look, how it will be edited, how it will be musically scored, how it will be mixed, how the titles will look, and with a good studio, how it will be released. What it's about will determine how it's made. Soup to nuts, how it's made.
Yeah.
Not just the script, the title sequence.
Right.
And so what he's calling it, so Lumet called it a theme. Before that, Kazan called it a spine.
Right.
And I'd read these books before, and to be honest with you, I didn't remember those parts. They never really stuck with me. But then, obviously, when I got to your stuff and I was reading in Invisible Ink, you used a different term than what they used, and it made more sense to me. You called it an armature. Can you tell me about how you kind of got there, and what does armature actually mean?
Well, I struggled. It's weird to say struggled with. I don't know if I struggled with it. Theme is a very hard thing to learn when you're learning, because people tell you that a story has to have a theme, right? And sometimes people tell you that you can have many themes, which I don't think is right. But they tell you got to have a theme in your story, and so you try to fit theme into your story. And I was so influenced by Rod Serling and The Twilight Zone, and one of the reasons is that it's very clear what each episode is trying to say, right? So a lot of people just think about the twist ending part of The Twilight Zone, but I was very interested in everything that led to that ending. Like, how did that surprise me? How it was, what told me that it was going there, and it always had a point. So what was the point of this piece? And so I internalized that because I was so young watching The Twilight Zone, and then later people told me I had a knack for theme, which I didn't know that I had. I just thought that's the way you write stories, right? But other people didn't do it. And what I realized is that stories don't have a theme. Stories are a theme. Stories are the manifestation of the theme.
Gotcha.
They express the theme. That's all they exist for.
Whereas a theme could be almost tacked on to it.
Right.
Right.
So
it's a story about a family. I guess the theme could be X.
Right.
You're saying based on the armature, the family has to be
right. And so it's just like Lumet said, I was working from the inside out. In fact, somebody told me once about one of my stories. They were like, oh, I know you know all these rules and everything, but you're not applying them. And I thought, you don't know what you're talking about. And it's not that I'm saying that what I was doing was working or not working. I don't know how to write anything unless I'm going from the theme out. Like, I can't just sit there and type things that happen. I don't know how people do that. I can't do that. I wouldn't know what to write if I wasn't trying to express that theme.
So it's actually the most logical thing in the world. You're saying you have to know what you're trying to say before you start writing.
Yes. Yeah. But I think that's a dyslexic thing. Right? When words are the enemy, right? Like, they are a barrier to me communicating my ideas, right? When I'm young and learning how to write. And it's hard to spell, and where do the commas go, and all that stuff. I learned how to not write anything unless it was right. Because I didn't want to have to go back and reread it and fix it and whatever. So my drafts sort of happen in my head. I don't really have drafts on paper very often. And even if I do, it's minor changes, and most of it has to do with the dyslexia stuff. This word belongs here and not there.
So you're actually working out in your head before you start writing.
I think so, yeah. I mean, it's so natural that I don't know.
Yeah, how other people do it.
I don't know how other people do it, but I was writing with a friend, and he told me that I would just stare at the computer for a long time and then write the scene, and it would be right. Where he would write a bunch of stuff, and then we'd have to pare it down, which is the way most people work, but I can't work that way. I don't know how to do that.
But how'd you find that word? Like, I've heard spine, I've heard the word spine, I've heard the word theme, of course.
Right.
I'd never heard armature.
Right. It's a strange thing I think it's mine, right?
Yeah.
I don't think it comes from somebody else, but maybe somebody else had the idea. But I can tell you it came from me very organically because I was working in creature shops. When I lived in Los Angeles, I was working in creature shops, and this is before CGI, so everything had to be built.
And by creature shops, you mean like if you're watching a movie and the swamp monster comes out, somebody builds that.
Somebody had to build it, right? So we were working on, what did I work on? Return of the Living Dead Part 2, and, I can't even remember what I worked. Night of the Creeps I worked on. I worked on a bunch of stuff that, like, the people who know them are like, whoa, you worked on that. But, like, nobody knows them. Yeah. So, but I worked on a lot of that kind of stuff. And I got to see these sculptors make these little maquettes, little versions of whatever the monster, the zombie, or whatever it was we were doing. And they're beautiful sculptures. These guys were really good. And but they had to make an armature, a skeleton first. And then the clay got built around that skeleton. And what I was taught at that time, it's like, well, we have to do that because I was young. I was 21 or something. And I was like, why are you doing that? And they were like, well, because the clay will collapse after a while. The clay will, it can't support itself. I'm like, oh, okay. And then later when I was...
just like a human body.
Yeah.
You take the skeleton out.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when I was trying to come up with a way to explain the point of a story, I thought back on that lesson about the clay and the sculpture and the armature there. So and I thought, well, that's the same function. It serves the same function. Everything hangs off the armature. It holds everything together. Everything's built around that armature. So it was a combination of being a storyteller, writer, and having worked in creature shops.
Yeah.
And seen that.
That you picked that word.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at it, just like, I guess, the human body, most people, it's funny because like I read Da Vinci's biography, and he said he would actually figure out the bone structure.
Yeah.
And then add layers and layers, right? And it's funny, he was thinking in the same way. First, I got to figure out what's going on inside, and then I manifest it comes out. So
he was also dyslexic.
Yeah, but it makes sense. You're figuring out what's at the core of this thing. It's like, before we build the house, what's the foundation got to look like? Whereas, I think it's easy. A lot of people think like, oh, you just sit down, you write, and eventually you find it. And I guess some people can work like that. But
it's a difficult way to work, though.
Yeah.
It's not that it's a difficult way to work. It's more fun in a lot of ways because you're just playing, right? But here's the way I like to think of it. If you think of it like sculpture, if you take this idea of sculpture, there are two kinds of sculpture, right? You can do additive sculpture, which is you start with the center, you start with a skeleton, and you add onto it, right? Or you can do reductive sculpture. You can have a block of marble or something and carve things away, right? You can get to the same place. But the problem is, if you're writing that way, you have to create the marble too, right? And what happens is, like Michelangelo said, I took away everything that wasn't David, right? Right? But the problem is this. People get attached to things, right? So they get attached to a scene. They get attached to a character. They get attached to a phrase. And so when they have to pare things down, they don't want to get rid of these things they love.
Yeah.
Right? That they've created, that they worked hard on, that they, that were maybe inspired. Oh, I can't believe I came up with that scene. But it may not fit anymore into what you're trying to say. But people will try to make it fit.
Yeah.
And so in the end, they haven't carved away everything that's not David. They've instead of David, they've made Quasimodo because they have all of these things it doesn't.
They're attached to, and they're trying to justify why it has to stay in the story.
Yeah. So it's a dangerous way to work unless you're ruthless about cutting.
Which is hard to do.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of an armature? Like of something that most people would have seen? Because it still feels kind of abstract. Like you're like, okay, so it's a skeleton. What is a skeleton?
Right. Okay. So if you go with the idea that stories have at their core, I believe, survival information, right? And that's a confusing thing for people because they usually think of survival as physical, but it can be emotional or spiritual or cultural, right? There are all kinds of survival. But at the story's core is there's going to be survival information. And the armature, the way I talk about it, is that sentence, right? The sentence that you can prove through your story or disprove through your story, right? So I'm trying to think of an armature from a story that we know. Oh, well, okay, The Wizard of Oz, right? So The Wizard of Oz, the armature is not There's No Place Like Home, right? Because you have to look at what the story proves. The story doesn't necessarily prove there's no place like home, but what the story does prove is that you may already have what you're looking for, which is why the Scarecrow already has a brain, right? And you see him use his brain throughout the piece, is why the Tin Man already has a heart and you see him crying and things throughout the piece, and that the lion already has courage and you see him being courageous even though he's scared throughout the piece. And so what the piece proves is that you may already have what you're looking for. Dorothy already had what she was looking for when she was at home in Kansas. That's why she says that's the way she expresses the armature. But really what she's saying is, oh, you may already have what you're looking for.
And all those characters were at home in the beginning.
Right. She had all those people. She had all those people. She had everything that she had in Oz, she had at home.
Yeah.
She had Professor Marvel, the fake wizard. She had the witch. She had the three friends. She had all of the same stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so when you use the word prove a couple times there, which kind of goes back to the Hitchcock stuff you talked about, proposal, argument, conclusion, act 1, act 2, act 3. And so the conclusion now is, okay, does this survival information of you already have what you need, do you now believe that, right? Or some of the other ones you've talked about is, get busy living, get busy dying, some of those types of other films where you're like, okay, well, this is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
How do I dramatize this armature, this survival information?
Right.
Well, if it's get busy living, get busy dying, you were like, I got to put him in hell.
Right.
Which is Shawshank Prison.
Right.
And so then, but I think that kind of goes back to why the story comes out of that, out of that center, right? As opposed to the other way around. Does that make sense? Like when you sit down and you're like, what I'm trying to say, the survival information, the armature, is get busy living, get busy dying.
Right.
I need a pretty extreme stakes.
Right. Right. Well, you need the stakes to be life and death.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. So if you're going to say to somebody, you have to choose, right? And so the way that that's done in the Shawshank Redemption is that you have a character who always chooses living, right? He chooses living when they put him in solitary confinement, right? They can't get him down, right? He has this sort of almost magical optimism in the face of horrible things. It's not like everything goes well for him in Shawshank Prison.
Yeah.
He's not without problems. He just chooses to see the glass as half or completely full often, right?
Yeah.
He's so that's the way it's proven, and it's contagious. The other prisoners get that, right? Andy Dufresne is really a character who brings beauty to a place of ugliness, and it's contagious.
Yeah.
You know?
And you can see the clone characters showing what happens if you don't.
Right.
When you decide to stop doing that.
Right. Like, well, the most amazing some of the most amazing writing is Brooks, the old man, getting out of prison and not being able to adjust. Right. And so you see, he's been in prison a long time, and you see him get out. You see him get this crappy job as a bag boy, you know, and you see his crappy apartment, and you see his life, and he ends up not coping, right? He ends up hanging himself, right? Brooks was here. He carves on the beam, right? And hangs himself. What's great is that when Morgan Freeman's character, Red, gets out, they mirror it so well. He has the same job, the same apartment, the same job, right? Because they're showing you by direct comparison the get busy dying and the get busy living.
So good.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even the way they built the inside of that apartment with those slats, so it looks like a prison still.
Yeah.
You know, you're just like, my God. But remember, going back to what Lament talks about, how once I find the center of this thing, get busy living, get busy dying, everything I do, every decision I make as a filmmaker is based on that.
Right.
So when you're talking about the armature, and like, how do you know you've got the armature, right? Like, so if I said like, if you said, Jesse, what's the armature of your film? And I was like, love.
Right.
Is that an armature?
No.
Why?
Because you can't prove it.
Huh. Okay.
You can't prove love, right? You can say love is difficult. You can say love is necessary. But you can't say love. There's nothing. You're saying nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So people will think that, oh, it's love. Oh, it's revenge. Or it's, you know, or they'll say this story has many themes. It's got love and revenge and friendship. None of those things are themes. Those are things that happen or that are in there. But it's they're not themes.
So going off of that, because I've heard the same thing. It was like, well, the theme is like, you know, vengeance.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, okay.
Yeah.
What is that? How do you make decisions? Because I mean, really, when we're coming back to like what Lament's kind of ringing the bell of like, once I know this, I know what to do.
Right.
Once I know what I'm trying to say, right? I know what the decisions. I think in Dog Day Afternoon, that's when he talked about how he picked the film stock to match like newsreel,
right?
Because he was worried about, you know, people like laughing him out of the building because of the subject matter. And he's like, but if I make it look like a newsreel, right? Because this whole thing was, you know, we have more in common with the ones we call freaks than we think we do, or something like that. You know, that's how he processed and made decisions. And so he's like, okay, now based on that, how would I make decisions? Everything from film stock to who I cast to costumes and on. When it comes to armature, like let's take an easy one that you've talked about before, like some things are more important than money.
Okay.
Right? Okay. Well, naturally, when you go, great, I sit down and write that, just based on that, look at how much farther and how much easier it is to write.
Yeah.
What are some things you know based on that armature? You're going to have as a writer.
You're going to have a character who thinks otherwise, right?
Yeah.
Right? You know that already.
Yeah.
Right? You're either going to... now, characters, usually the protagonist is a character of change, but they don't have to be, but they usually are. So you probably are going to take that character from thinking that money is the most important thing to understanding that money is not the most important thing.
Because you prove it.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's probably the way that's going to go down. So you know that already. So you know that something's going to have to force that character to see differently. Well, what would do that? I guess he could lose all his money. That's one way it could happen. Right? He could... his money could alienate him from people he loves, right? There are lots of things you could do, but you know that you have to force that. You know, characters don't want to change. They're just people, right? Right?
Yeah.
Right? And they don't want to change, so you have to force them to change. You have to squeeze that lump of coal into a diamond. It has to be a lot of heat and a lot of pressure to do it. So that's the way you have to do it. So you just have to go. If you take that character, like talk about it in Invisible Ink, and put them in the worst place they want to be, put them in their personal hell. Where's the last place that guy wants to be? Right?
Yeah.
Right? And if you know that, And you usually do if you're starting with a character that needs to know, for instance, that some things are more important than money. This is probably a person with money then.
Yeah.
Right? It could be.
Yeah.
It could be a person without money who tries to attain it, too.
Yeah.
There's that. But let's say we start with a person who has money. Well, then you're going to want to take that money away.
Yeah.
Right?
But even just think about that. In a minute, once you figure out your armature, look how much further you are along by starting in the center and going out than starting out here and going, there's a person. There's a person, and this person does something.
Right.
And it's interesting. He does something interesting. What could he do that's interesting? It's so big. There's no sandbox. And most great artists, they do better when we were just talking about the Termite Terrace guys. Like, most great artists, look at the stuff those people put out.
Yeah.
And their restrictions were so limited. Or you've talked about Mary Tyler Moore and all these different shows that had rules.
Yeah.
And the great art that came out of there. Once you make that sandbox of, well, I know that what I'm trying to say is some things are more important than money.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the ideas come faster.
Right. Yeah, they do. Well, like Andy Griffith, the Andy Griffith Show, one of my favorite shows, right? Andy Griffith was a Christian, very serious about being a Christian, and he said, as much as possible, I want my stories to have a Bible lesson in them. Now, it's not overt.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to know that. I watched the show for years without knowing that.
I never knew that until you told me. Yeah.
It doesn't matter in that way.
Yeah.
But what it does is it says, so everyone, first of all, he said lesson, right? Mm-hmm. So everyone is teaching something. And so that means it automatically has an armature. Mm-hmm. Right? So that show lasts and lasts and lasts because at its core, there's always an armature.
They had something to say.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a waste of your time.
Right.
Hey, I watched the half an hour and, man, I got to go back and talk to my kid again. I think I was a little too harsh with him or whatever.
Whatever it is, yeah.
There was something of value in there. Whether you could identify it or not, you could feel it.
Right. It doesn't matter, right? Rod Serling didn't have that. Rod Serling wasn't a Christian, right? Serling, but he knew to say something that mattered. Yeah. Right. It doesn't have to be a Bible lesson. It could be whatever. But both those people understood they had to have some information for people to take away. Mm-hmm. And I think that used to be common knowledge, and now it's thought of as something cheap or you can't tell people how to live, or you can't. It's like what? But if you live long enough, you don't have to live very long to learn a lesson about how life works.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, of course you have wisdom to impart, and it's ridiculous to think that people don't. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Of course people have wisdom to impart.
And it used to be, again, all this stuff starts with like survival, but also love. Mm-hmm. Like Grandma and Grandpa will sit around, the campfire and be like, you keep talking about your job and how much you're working, but, some things are more important than money. Let me tell you, when I was your age, I was doing the same thing, and I missed watching your dad grow up.
Right.
And I'll tell you what, now I know, don't make the same mistake. They were not saying it to be preachy or anything like that. No. They're telling the story about, hey, I made the same mistake, and I didn't go to your dad's football games or whatever.
Yeah.
And so this is a really natural thing to do, is because you're doing it because hey, don't go through the same pain I did.
Yeah. People do it all the time in real life.
Yeah. See, in real life, it makes a lot of sense because it happens constantly.
Yeah.
Right. But then you sit down and write a script and you go, I can't. Well, I mean, Rod Serling had something to say. And I think that's one of the reasons this stuff is, it seems like even now more than ever, people still talk about it.
Oh, yeah.
And think about how many writers back then, their body of work just doesn't hold up. You go back and watch his stuff and it's crazy.
Yeah.
But he knew what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
And then he dramatized it.
Yeah.
And by the end you go, dang, that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
He never, did you ever hear him talk about how he structured stuff, Rod Serling? Because all of his stuff is so bam, 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 bam.
Yeah. I have never read anything about how he structured. Padachevsky wrote a lot about how he structured things and talked about, well, not a lot, but he did write enough about it. But some of those guys didn't really write about it. A lot of, it's interesting because a lot of people of a certain generation knew this stuff through osmosis or through hearing good stories or knowing good stories or something. And they thought they were working from their instincts. And then later film schools came along and books came along to tell you how to do it. I mean, there've always been some books, but not a lot of them.
Yeah.
And now there's plenty. And in a way that's good, in a way that's bad. But, so they sometimes had no idea how they did what they did,
Yeah.
They just did it. And And then later when books showed up that told people how to do it, they didn't like those books because it's like, well, you just feel it out. But plenty of bad people feel it out too, right?
Yeah,
you know what I
sure.
mean? So it's like, not everybody can play by ear.
But
right?
when you watch, that's a good way of saying it. But when you watch their stuff, it's so direct.
Yeah.
And down the line, and it's satisfying at the end.
I think it's because they're not ashamed to do that. People often say that, oh, it seems like animated things for kids seem to have better stories, right? Well, because they're not afraid to be clear and to tell the story to kids, right? It's when it's like adults. Well, I got to sound smart. I got to be smart. I got to, again, I say it all the time, but it's weird to me that we will praise a storyteller whose work is confusing, hard to follow, hard to understand, and we will just give them, well, they're just very smart. Right?
Yeah.
Instead of saying they don't know the first thing about communicating with their audience, which is the way I take it. Right? And we'll take somebody who's really good at communicating with an audience and say, well, it's so pedestrian. It's weird. It's not easy to communicate with an audience.
No.
But it is easy to confuse an audience. So what we're saying is it's all reversed. It's weird.
Yeah.
Anybody can confuse an audience.
Yeah.
Anyone.
Yeah.
Right?
Kid wears no clothes type stuff.
Yeah.
When you're starting with the Armature, can you give me an examples of how that helps you make decisions? Like the fact that he said, title sequence, or like any of these things, costumes, right? Some things are more important than money. Like, okay, well, how would that affect some of your decisions, not just as a writer, but as a director?
Right. Well, okay. So if we're saying some things are more important than money, and let's say if we do the thing where the guy has money and loses it, right? Again, you could do the reverse, but let's just do that one. So if you're doing that one, well, how do you show money? Right? You can show actual money, right?
Yeah.
But money? How about he has several Picassos in his apartment? That's money.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, what kind of furniture should this person have? Like, we have to say money is everything to this person.
Yeah.
So the best of everything. And that's going to have to do with the costumes then, right? Oh, this is the best of everything, right? And maybe when the guy goes to pick out a tie, he opens his closet and it's the tie closet, right? And there's ties,
all ties.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's got like one of those things you push and it moves like at the dry cleaners. And you know what I mean?
So many.
It's got so many ties, right? And maybe they're color coded so they gradate. And it's like, wow, that guy's got a lot of ties, right? Very expensive, silk, anything that says money. And everything should do that. If this guy thinks money is everything, then everything should do that. Everything should tell you, so it tells you that you don't have anybody drinking out of a plastic.
Right. It's a goblet or whatever. Yeah.
It's not this, right? And that it's not, he doesn't drink wine that you just get at the grocery store. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's from his vineyard.
Yeah, or whatever, right? Whatever you have to do, right? Yes, he could get in his own fancy car if you want, but if you want to say really wealthy, then he doesn't drive his car.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Things like that. All those.
So you're making all those decisions.
Right. You're not deciding, oh, I want to have a guy with a fancy car, or I want that guy to have it. Wouldn't it be cool if he had a bunch of ties? Or, that's not the way you make decisions. I always say that when you're doing it right, you really feel like you're making discoveries versus making decisions.
Help me understand what you mean by discoveries.
Well, when you're making decisions, it's more like, well, let's see, what else could happen? What could happen? When you're making discoveries, you're like, well, what needs to happen? I need to show that he has money. How do I show that? I need to show that he thinks money is very important. How do I show that? Right? And one way to do that, for instance, might be you see a guy with all this money, but maybe when it comes to tipping somebody, it's a coin, right?
Right. Yeah, contrast.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so you go, oh, that's a great way to show how he is with money, right? That's a discovery versus a decision. Now, you may make a decision about which way, if you've got several ways to illustrate an idea.
Yeah.
But there's a sense of discovery when you're doing it right, I think. And it becomes more difficult to take credit for those things. You don't feel like you did anything. You feel like you found it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you had the compass to help you find it.
Yeah.
When you talk about that reminds me of when you've talked about the idea of being a slave to your story, where I think if you don't have, well, I can just take from before I understood Armature, I would make a lot of decisions based on things I liked.
Right.
Like, I've always liked anamorphic lenses, or like, hey, I always liked how this looked, or I like these types of costumes, or symmetry in my. It was just based on vibe, I think, or personal preference, but it had nothing to do with the story, as opposed to going, no, this is it. This text, this is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
In light of that, whether I like the color palette or the lenses, seems like it doesn't matter as much. So, but you use such strong words, the slave to the story. Like, help me understand where that's...
Well, it's because it's bigger than you, right? You're serving something bigger than you if you're a storyteller. And so, it's not about you, and so when it's not about you, if you're telling the story about somebody who learns that some things are more important than money, then you don't get to dictate. You don't get to say, "Yeah, but I like pajamas with holes in them." Right? They're comfortable, and I like them. You don't get to do that because now you're diluting what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And you're like, no, this guy, some things are more important than money. Why would he have holes in his pajamas?
Right. But maybe, I like drive-thrus. I like to go to Jack in the Box in the middle of the night or whatever. It's like, yeah, but this guy doesn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This guy doesn't. So that's what I mean by serving your story. You have to do what the story needs. What does it need? You have to look at your story and you have to listen to it, and it'll tell you what it needs if you listen.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't do that. It is personal preference. But I like this, but I like that, but I like monsters or whatever it is they like. And they just try to throw it in there without adhering to the story or serving the story.
When we talk about going off of that, how do you reconcile that with the idea of like your individual voice?
Yeah.
Because that's something I would, as an artist, whether it's stand-up, it's like, well, when Rodney found his voice, that's when he became a great stand-up. Or when Seinfeld found his voice, or, when this director found their voice. How do you reconcile being a slave to the story and also that idea of like having, I don't know, what would you call that? Style?
Well, but style's not a style. I have a friend who's an illustrator, and he told me once, people will often, it's a younger people are very obsessed with style. So they'll, I like that style. I like his style. I like that style. Because they can't see anything else yet, right? They can't see below the style yet. And so that's what they focus on. None of the thought process that brought a person to that style or whatever, right? They can only think in terms of what's on the surface. But I have this friend who's an illustrator, and people have often said, "Oh, I like your style." And he said to me, "Bryan, I have no idea what my style is. I can't see it." And he goes, "When I try to do it, I can't do it. Like I try to do my style, I can't draw anymore." So his style comes completely out of how he sees and interprets the world, right? So all those examples I gave about you have the rich guy, and you got to show he's rich. Now, those are just my solutions to that problem. Somebody else might have different solutions, and they might work just as well, but different solutions to that problem. So they don't have the Picassos on the wall, but they do some other thing.
Yeah.
Right?
He's a car collector. Whatever. They solved it in their mind.
Yeah, and that's the way everything is going to get solved, right? So they may want a close-up where I would want a long shot, but they may be coming at it from trying to solve the same problem.
Right.
Right? And so the style is just filtered through. It's just how you solve problems, how you personally solve a given problem. That's where the style is going to come from.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about the style. It'll take care of itself.
And I think that's because it's driven, it's motivated.
Right.
Because like when we talk about Lumet, like I can look at a Lumet movie and know he did it, but the verdict looks really different stylistically than 12 Angry Men.
Right.
Or than, Dog Day Afternoon or something. And I think that's the mark of a great director.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like The Apartment looks different than a lot of Billy. You know what I'm saying? Like the opening shots with like the desks going on forever. That looks really different than some Like It Hot.
Right.
I don't know.
But Billy Wilder said something really interesting. He was really proud of the way he shot his movies, and he used to say, "There's not a phony shot in any of my movies." And what he meant was, I'm serving my story every time, right? Because let's take The Apartment. So you've got Jack Lemmon working in an office, and you've got all these identical desks, like going back into infinity, and he's just one of these people.
So good.
Right?
Yeah.
But what he wants as a character is to stand out. What he wants is to rise above.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be one of these nameless, faceless workers, right? So that's how that decision gets made, right? If he's in an office all by himself, well, then you visually haven't helped to tell that story that he wants to break away from this group.
Yeah.
Right? Right now, he's just a worker, just like everybody else. Right? Oh, he wants to move out of that. Okay, well, that decision's being made not by Billy Wilder, but by the story.
Yeah. Yeah, he's following the story.
Right. Now, somebody else might solve that problem a different way.
Yeah, but that's in Billy's brain, that made sense.
Yeah.
And if you actually dissect that movie, it's kind of disgusting how good his decisions are.
I know.
Like the key stuff. You're like, oh my God. How did you...
I know. The stuff with the key, the stuff with the mirror, the stuff. Yeah. But there's also, when, Jack Lemmon can't get into his apartment because, he lends it out to all these executives. And so he's stuck out in the cold. There's a really great scene of him in Central Park sitting on a bench all by himself in the middle of the night because one of these executives says, "Hey, I got this girl. I want to go to your,
Yeah.
So he's sitting out and he's freezing and there's a nice long shot looking down the benches, and of course they're empty, so it makes him more alone. A medium shot of him on a bench, he's not alone. You have to see all the people who aren't there, right, to see him alone.
But you can't make that decision if you don't know what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And what would you say the Armature department is?
I would say the Armature is don't prostitute yourself. Both Shirley MacLaine, right, her character, Miss Kubelik, whatever. I forget her name now. I know it when I'm not on a podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
But Shirley MacLaine's character and he are both prostituting themselves.
Yeah.
Right? As a matter of fact, there's a really great scene where Shirley MacLaine has just had this tryst with her boss, who she's having an affair with, in Jack Lemmon's apartment. And he's got to go home. This guy has got to go home to his wife. And he goes, I've been busy and I haven't had time to get you anything. And he pulls out some money and he gives it to her. And he goes, you get yourself something nice, or I hear there's a sale at Bergdorf's or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he gives her the money and she starts to take off her coat. And he says, "What are you doing? I have to go." She goes, "Well, I just thought as long as it's paid for," right? Because she's prostituting herself and she's becoming aware that that's what she's doing.
Yeah.
Right. So, and
that's how we knew how to write that.
Right. Right.
It wasn't guessing.
Yeah. And he wasn't trying to come up with clever lines.
Yeah.
Right?
To look smart, or like you're saying, the camera movements, you don't notice his stuff.
No.
And there's that like tracking shot when she's running at the end.
Yeah.
But you don't even think about it as like a fancy anything.
No.
Because it's all motivated.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's stupid. It's so good. But I'm just saying, like, once you know who you are, you know what to do. Like, once you know what you're trying to say, in light of that, what is the best way to dramatize this and bring this to life?
Yeah.
If you don't have an Armature, what happens?
Then you have a bunch of random things, right? And most of the time, people are writing, if they're writing a movie or whatever they're writing, they're trying to string enough interesting things together, right? They think if they have a bunch of good scenes, right, or a bunch of good characters, or a bunch of good ideas, or a compelling enough world, that they have a story.
Yeah. And those are the pearls. You've referred to those as pearls before. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. And I wish I could this is not mine. I don't remember who said it. It might have been Billy Wilder, it might have been somebody else. But I've only read it one place and I haven't seen it since. But basically the saying is that it isn't the pearls that make the necklace. It's the string. And that's a perfect way to think about an armature, right? That the armature is the string, right? But a cool scene or whatever, those are just pearls, and they may not go together. They may not make a necklace. So most people are trying to just make enough cool things that they think the thing will work because it's enough cool things.
Yeah.
But, some of the coolest things in the world are the things that grow out of the story.
Yeah.
They don't exist on their own. I heard a director of he's a successful director, but I don't happen to like his work. But I won't say who it is.
Yeah.
But like a lot of us, very influenced by Jaws. And he was going on and on about the line, you're going to need a bigger boat in Jaws. And what a good line it was. What a good line. But that line doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
It's not a good line anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Like if you said that in Shawshank Redemption, you'd be like, what? What's
that have to do with anything? Right. It doesn't exist by itself.
Yeah.
Right. And it comes out of the character who's afraid of the water. It comes out of the most scared character. Right. He's just a human being going, we got to get a bigger boat. We can't be out here in this little thing. Right.
Yeah.
It's good because it's human. It's good because it expresses his fear.
Yeah.
Right. They don't make characters like that anymore. Characters are too heroic, I think, now. So they don't have any fear, but the fear connects you to that character. The fear, you connect to that character because you go, I don't want to be in the middle of the ocean with a shark either.
Yeah.
Right? That's more real than the version now, which is let's go get it.
Yeah. And that's where you get that's why, I'm trying to think of a better scene than the scene where they're in the boat and he starts talking about the Indianapolis.
Yeah.
You can see where he's coming from.
Right.
It's totally motivated.
Right.
The way they set that up. Mm-hmm. When only two people in the room knew what that was. Wait, you were on the.
Yeah.
And then, he's like, oh, why? What was that?
Right.
And everybody's just looking at him, and you just go like, that scene, it's motivated. It had to happen.
Right.
We had to understand where this guy came from.
Right.
What he was about. And you're right. Like, there was hatred there.
Right.
And how was that motivated? How do you write that stuff, any of that stuff you're talking about, without knowing what you're trying to say?
Right.
I guess, what would you say the armature of Jaws is?
I would say to face your fears, to conquer your fear.
What do you base that off of?
I base it on the fact that the character starts off hating the water. And his very last line is, I used to hate the water, as he's swimming along in the middle of the ocean. Right? That's what I base it on. That's what it tells me.
And that last line proves that in order to face your fears, you have to, conquer your fears, you have to face them.
Yeah.
Because we find out really early, right, how much he hates the water.
Yeah.
Even when he's on that little ferry thing, he's gripping his hands on the thing.
Yeah.
And then at the end, he's paddling through the water, and he says, what line was?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to hate the water. He doesn't eat,
But how could you write that line?
Yeah.
Without first going, here's what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah, you couldn't.
And the funny thing about that and that line, or even the when you go to the pearl thing, there's nothing fancy about the string. Everybody looks at the pearls like, God, that's a beautiful day. That's really fancy. I bet that was expensive, whatever. The little thing holding it together, that's probably, I'm assuming that's why you call your book Invisible Ink.
Right. That's why.
It's like people look at Yoda, but they don't see the little skeleton inside.
Right.
But the skeleton is Yoda.
Right. Yeah.
So if you don't have the skeleton, what do you have?
You don't have anything. You have a jellyfish, right?
Yeah.
Right. You don't have anything. It doesn't have shape. A lot of the times when people you see this with short films a lot. Short films, usually they have one gag, right? And they got to draw it out for 5 minutes. Or they are a piece of a bigger thing. Like if I'd had more time, I only had 5 minutes and, but if I got the money, right. They don't know. So what happens is they just sort of end often. They often don't end soon enough, but they end.
Yeah.
And it's not, it didn't go anywhere. It has no shape. So it feels like it was cut off because it doesn't have a shape. And we all understand that shape. We all understand, like, when you're watching a film and you think, oh, it's over, and it goes on for 20 more minutes, that's poorly structured, right? Because everything told you this is ending now.
Yeah.
Right? Everything about it told you it was ending.
The shark's dead.
Right.
How much longer do you want to do this?
Right. We don't have to watch them swim home.
Yeah.
Right. So that's everybody feels the shape. They understand it. When people say something's too long, there's no such thing as too long. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
Some of the longest films I've ever seen are short films, but it's because once people have all the information they need, they're done watching.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They're done.
You proved it. He overcame his fear.
Yeah.
Why are we going to a barbecue?
Right. So, but you have false endings. Aliens has a great false ending, right? Where it seems like it's all over now, right? But the bigger thing is not resolved. That's another one where the armature is to face your fear, is to conquer your fear.
Yeah.
Right? Ripley's afraid of the aliens. She conquers the aliens. She's plagued with these dreams from the first Alien movie, right? So so she has these dreams. She can't sleep at night. In the end, she defeats the queen alien, and she's about to put the little girl into hypersleep for the long space journey. And the little girl says, "Can I dream?" And Ripley says, "Yeah, I think we both can," because now she can.
Yeah.
Right? You can't write that line if you don't know.
You can't write it. Yeah, unless you know what you're saying.
Yeah. Why did I bring that up? I know, because I want to talk about aliens.
No, but I mean, it's the same principle.
Yeah.
You can't write it without knowing what you're trying to say. Last question. But Bryan, I think I have two armatures. I think I have some things are more important than money, and I have, in order to conquer your fears, you have to face them. Why can't I have both? Won't that make my film twice as good?
No. Because how do you you know what? It makes too much noise. And I'll explain what I mean. So Ben Burtt, the sound designer, who I'm a huge fan of Ben Burtt, and I met him once at Pixar, and I think I scared him off because I was like, "You're the coolest guy in the world." But he did all the sound stuff for Star Wars, designed all those sounds, which are the way he did it, the way he thinks. That guy, he's amazing.
Yeah.
E.T. He did E.T. stuff, and he's
they like banging on the things out the
to do the blasters.
Towers. Yeah, just
everything.
How'd you think of that?
I know that guy. Anyway, so I'm a huge fan of Ben Burtt. And he was a big fan of Treg Brown, and Treg Brown did all the Warner Brothers sound effects and for the cartoons and on the movies as well. So he's a big.
I've never thought about how difficult that would have been.
Yeah, so he did all that stuff, Treg Brown. So he's a big Treg Brown fan, and Treg Brown did the sounds. I believe it was Treg Brown who did the sounds in the Robin Hood, the Errol Flynn Robin Hood, and there's arrows in that thing, and. Ben Burtt liked the sound of the arrows in that movie, and when he did Raiders of the Lost Ark, he wanted that sound for the arrows. And so he didn't know how it was done, and so he was making all these arrows and having all these arrows made to try to record them through the air. And what he discovered was, if an arrow is made well, it doesn't make any noise, right? Because it's designed to cut through the air with no friction, right? And it's when it has extra stuff on it that it makes noise, right? And I think that what you're trying to do is your armature is this arrow that has no fat on it. You don't want any noise, right? You don't want the friction. And I think if you have extra stuff, you have friction. And it makes a lot of noise and it's bumpy. And it's like, well, what is that about? Is that scene about? Are you trying to, then now you get people in their heads and they're not watching your piece anymore.
Yeah.
Right? They're not in their hearts, they're not in their guts, they're in their head trying to figure out what you're trying to say.
Yeah. It's a mental exercise.
Yeah. So so you have to make a clean arrow that doesn't make any noise.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does to me.
Perfect. Thanks, Bryan.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks for watching You Are a Storyteller. If you have any questions or there's a storytelling topic you want us to cover, leave a comment below or email us at hello@believeagency.com.